Okay, so there are many different ways to skin a cat when it comes to resource management, but over the years we've really landed on two primary sort of archetype models. There's the centralized model and a decentralized model. You can break down almost any resource management approach into one of these two models. Either one can be successful. It's even possible to transition from one model to the other as the needs of your organization change, as personnel availability changes over time. But your organization's unique business requirements, delivery model, and internal staffing are what essentially are going to determine which model will be most effective for you. So we'll talk about the centralized and decentralized models and how they differ. But first, let's talk about those questions that you should be asking yourself before you decide which way to go. So these are some of the topics that we discuss with our customers pretty much any time we're talking about how to implement a successful resource management process. What are some areas of opportunity for improvement within your organization? Are you struggling with overbooking resources? Do you typically have a lot of underutilized resources on the bench? What is your organizational structure? How are you organized in your operations team versus the delivery team? What availability do you have internally to manage the process? Who are the key decision makers in the organization when it comes to resource staffing? Sort of where is the point of decision in your organization? Does that lie with delivery? Does that lie in operations? Basically, who is making those decisions? Are those decisions shared? Do you have sort of a matrix organization where you have different teams or departments that are communicating? Do you share resources across different functional teams? So things like that. Okay, first let's talk about centralized. What do we mean here? The centralized model relies on designated resource management personnel. These are the people who are responsible for managing your resource pool. Pretty specific. These resource managers will track resource availability, determine project resource needs, and proactively identify risks and needs for the resource pool, such as too much bench time, not enough qualified resources to meet future project requirements, conflicting project requirements, things along those lines. This model does require an increased administration within the organization because the resource manager's focus is going to be on the resource pool. And they may have less visibility into the specifics of each project or any individual project over the life cycle. Okay, let's compare that to a decentralized model. What do we mean here? And when would this be an effective model? So the decentralized model works best if your organization doesn't have the personnel to be able to focus solely on resource management, or when there are cross-functional responsibilities that might get in the way of addressing staffing needs. You know, an example might be, you have someone in operations who spends a little time with finance, spends a little time with resource management. Suddenly you're in the middle of month end and 6 new SOWs land in your inbox and you've got to staff up these projects. And there's just not enough time. So we need to spread that out. Wouldn't it be great if there was someone else who could take on that work? Yeah, so who knows best the needs of a project than the project manager? Conversely, who understands the individual complexities of the individual resources, like a resource manager? So that's where the decentralized model can help you. So when you grant a project owner or the resources manager, like the line manager, the ability to create or manage bookings, you're adding some key benefits here. First, if a project manager is managing the bookings, that is the person who's going to understand best the unique needs and shifting changes to a project plan. They're going to understand that, hopefully, better than anyone else in your organization. Second, a resources manager should know better than anyone else what's happening with those resources under their HR management. So for example, if a resource has some upcoming PTO that maybe they've mentioned to their manager, but it hasn't been formally requested through a schedule request, so it's not showing up in the system, the resources manager will know that. No one else would know that. If a resource is feeling sick and they let you know via email, hey, I'm not feeling great, you understand that that person may need some adjustment to their scheduling. Each individual skill set, particular client requests, coming directly to the project owner. Maybe there's a hardware issue that so far only the project owner knows about, and that's going to cause a delay where everyone's bookings need to get shifted out until that issue is resolved. So things like that, where the knowledge rests in specific individuals, you can grant those specific individuals the ability to create and manage their own bookings. This does come with some challenges, though. Sometimes your project managers might, be kind of nose down in their own projects and not be aware of sort of the overall resource needs across the organization. So you might run into sort of a resource tug-of-war where you have different project managers trying to get their hands on the same resource. I'm a former resource manager, so even in a centralized environment, we run into that quite often. So if you're not careful to track and share your overall resource utilization needs via forecasting, accurate forecasting and reporting, you can run into some conflicts with this type of a model. We at TopStep, we recommend holding a regular weekly, monthly, ideally weekly resource staffing meeting so that all of the different decision makers in the organization, basically anyone who has vested interest and has the power to book or manage bookings of the resources, gets on a call, talk about the overall needs of the organization. That way that information isn't siloed. We're looking at an organization-wide level. Okay, so we talked about the two major models of how to approach resource management. Now let's talk about sort of the functionality of managing each module in OpenAir. So we have a few different categories here of functionality that we can talk about. So as anyone on this call knows who has much experience with OpenAir at all, there are many, many different ways that you can use OpenAir to manage your resource staffing needs. The primary tool, of course, is the resource module. There are several ways to configure and utilize the resource module to fit your specific staffing needs. You have your bookings. There's the older booking request feature. There's booking approvals, as well as the newer booking planner and the resource demand request features. Besides the resource module, you can also use the projects module. What do we mean by that? We're talking about task assignments. So if you're someone who lives in your project module and that's where your comfort level is and you have a grasp of what's happening with your resources from the project module, absolutely is a viable way to track and manage resources in OpenAir. One advantage of the bookings is that it does tend to support, depending on which feature you use, it does tend to support either a centralized or decentralized model. We find that using the projects module tends to work best with a decentralized model, where the people who are in the project day to day are the ones who are actually managing the resources. Okay, let's talk about manual bookings. Hopefully everyone on the call knows what a booking is, right? Sometimes your organization may rename booking. Sometimes it gets confused with, some of the financial terminology. So you might refer to these as your allocations or your schedules or something along those lines. But essentially what we're talking about is the scheduling feature within the resources module in OpenAir. It's the thing that you create to show which user is going to be working on something, when they're going to work on it, for how long they're going to work on it, and which specific project or task, which we'll talk about later, they're going to actually be working on. Essentially, the booking is your scheduling of the resources. There's several options for creating bookings, but the concept is essentially the same. You have your resource the date when you need them, how much of their time you need, and which projects they're going to be working on. You can use the booking form, which we go to our booking resources module. We go to bookings and list view, and you're basically looking at individual bookings in that list. And then, of course, we use our global create button, and we open up the booking form. You can use something called repeat bookings to create multiple bookings at one time from within the booking form, or you can just create one at a time as you go. There's also the booking grid or the booking worksheet, which is the terminology that's being used more often now. This is somewhat misunderstood by some resources, but if you haven't already, I implore you to look up the advanced booking worksheet. In fact, if you go to topstepconsulting.com and look through our resource library, there's actually a webinar that talks about the specific nitty-gritty of the newer features within OpenAir resources. And we spent a good deal of time talking about the advanced booking worksheet. Something that some folks don't know is that there's actually an option to enable a booking worksheet within the projects module. So if you're more comfortable in the projects module, that's something that you can explore. Something else I want to talk about regarding the bookings, booking types. So booking types already exist out of the box, so to speak, when you get an OpenAir environment up and running. But what do those mean? What do they do? So a booking type is essentially a label that gets associated with a specific booking. They're really great for things like managing your process workflow. You can set up email alerts based on a specific booking type. A really good example of workflow that I've personally implemented and a lot of customers have is, let's say you have a booking type called requested. So some resource who has the ability to create bookings but maybe not the final say on who gets booked when and where, can create a booking, and maybe there's a form permission or a permission rule that says that that particular resource can only create bookings with the requested booking type. So when they hit save, you can set up a notification that says, okay, when a booking is created and the booking type is requested, send an email with these details to this user or this group of users. So then those people would be, I guess, considered your approvers. So these are resources who maybe have a bigger view of the resource pool and availability, and they'll make a determination on, hey, is this a good use of this resource? Are they available? That user could use a booking type called approved or confirmed, for example. They'll change the booking type, hit save. You can have another notification set up so that when a booking is updated and the booking type is changed to confirmed, an email goes out. This is really helpful. You can send an email out to maybe the original requester, the person who created the requested booking, the project owner from the project on the booking, and the booking resource themselves. Just saying, hey, FYI, you have a new confirmed booking. So booking types are really powerful. Okay, let's talk about some pros and cons of sort of directly entering your bookings into the system. And what we mean by manual bookings or directly entering bookings, simply put, you're just hitting create and you're putting a booking in the system. Some folks on the call, maybe you don't, that's just how, you just thought that was how you book people. We'll talk about some other options after this slide. So manual bookings do have some advantages. First, the resource is immediately scheduled. There's no lag time. Their schedule's updated. Their utilization is impacted. Their availability has been adjusted immediately once you hit save. You can use the booking types to sort of control how that availability shows up in a report, for example. You could have scheduled bookings separate from confirmed bookings in a report. But in general, once you create that booking, it's on the schedule. Second, you can utilize those notifications we talked about to build out a workflow and communication across the organization. This is really good if you maybe have some struggles with siloing of data. in your organization and you want more visibility into, who's doing what work and when, you can use these notifications that get triggered when a booking is created. Finally, you can control project access through who gets assigned for time entry. So if you're an administrator and you have access, the administration access in OpenAir, under the application settings in the project settings, under other settings, so you have to drill down a little bit, there's a setting here, users available for assignment to a project. So you can actually restrict task assignments, which is the most common way that users are granted access to enter time on a project, to only those users who have already been booked to a particular project. So that's just another way that you can further drill down and set up some controls and methodology in your resource management process. Absolutely, without a doubt, bookings are the foundation of resource management within the resources module. Now, we talked a lot about the good side of just directly entering the bookings. On the other hand, when you directly enter bookings, it does rely on manual configuration to get the most out of that workflow. You have to set up every booking type. You have to configure every notification. And first and foremost, that requires some overhead and correct access to the system. Secondly, no workflow is happening until users create the booking and something is actually done manually. So there's not a lot of automation happening when you directly enter your bookings. Also, because the booking is created immediately, it does require some strict oversight over your resource bookings and availability. This type of model or this type of approach tends to correlate with maybe more overbooking of resources, or that resource tug of war that I mentioned earlier. Let me get a stranglehold on this mouse here. All right. So let's talk about booking requests. So if you're maybe newer to OpenAir, you may not have really heard of booking requests. This is an older feature. I have to say we aren't seeing this used as frequently now that there are some newer options available. But booking requests absolutely still have their part depending on your particular model. So what a booking request can do for you is add the ability for a user to request a booking for a named resource or a generic. Just sidebar, what do we mean? So a named resource, that's a person, that's a user. They log into the system, they enter their time. You might see them in the break room. A generic resource is sort of a placeholder user. It's not associated with a real human being, but it can be associated with things like job code, a role, etc., so that you can perform forecasting against your resource needs, and without having to actually put a real live person book to a project. So you have the ability to even restrict workflow so that only a generic resource can be requested. So what that does is that works really well within a centralized model, because you can actually have the decision makers being the ones who are receiving the request for a generic resource, and then it's up to them, depending on what type of generic they're getting requested, to go find a named resource that matches that skill set. So what happens is this pushes the booking process through the organized workflow. And like I said, that really does support the centralized resource management model, and it allows for an automated approval routing and control over when, which, and how the resources are booked. All right. Let's see. think I went too far. Yeah, so pros and cons of booking requests. So the obvious pros of this approach is that it does allow for that automated workflow. So it restricts the booking of named resources to a central authority who has visibility over the entire resource pool. Now, for the downsides. Because resources aren't booked until the request is approved, that resource is sort of in limbo. There's no visibility to that resource's schedule until after the booking request is approved. So you could theoretically have the same resource requested by 4 different project owners, and until one of those requests gets approved, none of those requesters are going to see whether that resource is still actually available. And because it does require such a formalized approval process, it doesn't necessarily fit very well with a decentralized model. If you have a project owner who's staffing their own projects and approving their own staffing, there's really no need for a formalized approval process. Okay, let's talk about booking approvals. So booking approvals I think of as sort of like the next generation booking request. So what this does, this allows you to request a booking in a workflow that is a little more similar to, say, a timesheet approval process versus the booking request itself. So what I mean by that is you create a booking and it sits in a pending or requested status, but that booking is still there. So like manually creating bookings, the booking is existing, it's sitting there, it's affecting that user schedule. Anyone who wants to use that user can see their availability immediately. Now, can you still try to poach a resource when you see that that resource is booked but not approved? Sure, that happens. But in general, there's just a lot more visibility here. So this model actually, this approach supports a centralized or decentralized model. It offers the automated workflow of the booking request without all the downsides. You can have the project owner, resource manager, or even the individual resource approve bookings. You can have resources approve their own bookings because, you know, who knows more than anyone when you're available, right? So because the resource is booked during that whole approval process, you can view these tentative bookings without fully committing to a resource. So obviously we talked a lot about that already, but let's dig down into the real pros and cons here. What's good about it? So automated workflow is big, as well as having the ability to create that booking immediately. So it's reportable, viewable, it's in your system. You can enforce workflow around the use of generics, just like with the resource request, and it also supports resource task assignment controls if you configure your system that way. Now, some downsides. This is another limbo situation. You can theoretically create a booking in requested status, save, but if you don't submit that booking, it's just sitting there, never being declined or approved. Think about it, you know, like we mentioned, this is somewhat similar to the timesheet process. So this would be like having an open timesheet that's just sitting out there. Hasn't been submitted, no one can approve it or reject it, it's just there. It's affecting that resource's availability, but because it isn't approved, it's not going to, the work's not going to get done, and you may end up with a resource on the bench when they could have been utilized. This model also requires alignment between the approval process and your booking types. For example, do your booking types conflict with the approval process? Do you have an old booking type for tentative? Well, does an approver or anyone else looking at your booking see the status is approved, but the booking type is tentative? Is this really going to happen? So just from a usability standpoint, it's good to align the booking type with your process for the approvals. Basically, does it make sense to anyone viewing the booking? Okay, let's talk about the booking planner. really like the booking planner. It's come a long way since it was first deployed. So the booking planner came out a few years ago, and when it came out, we weren't real stoked about it. There was a lot of sort of unexpected behavior. It didn't do a lot, you know, kind of poking it with a stick, like do a trick. It's not really useful. But I have to say, starting with the next release and then almost every release after it first came out, OpenAir has really stepped it up and added a lot more enhancements and functionality to the booking planner that, in my opinion, make it something that everyone should consider using the booking planner. One nice thing is that you can use the booking planner, have it available, but still use some of these other methods in conjunction with the planner. So what is the planner? So basically, you can think of the planner as almost like a Gantt chart for bookings. So you can see graphically on a grid, broken down into time frames, the span of a booking over time, which resource is booked, to which project they're booked, etc. The relative length of the booking band denotes the start and end date. It's really cool. So why is it so cool? Well, first of all, it gives something that people have been clamoring for since I first even heard of OpenAir, which is drag and drop, drag and create, drag and edit functionality for bookings. It's right there. You can grab a booking. If it needs to start on the 10th and not the 2nd, click and grab the front of that booking and drag it over to the 10th. Boom, it's updated. You can also just click and drag on a span of time and create a booking directly onto the planner. Also, the planner supports another thing that people have always asked for, is the inline creation, deletion, and editing of a booking. Basically, you can hover or right-click over a booking in the planner. You can duplicate it. You can delete it. You can edit it, etc. You can swap resources. Also, the booking planner now supports bulk changes. What do we mean by that? It means you can check a box next to 1,500 bookings and update the resource at once. You can change the booking type. You can delete. You can, just what it says. You can make all these changes in bulk across multiple bookings. So another thing, when you have the ability to choose between the resource view or the project view within the planner. So we can see a resource down view, which is each resource and every project they're booked to, and then the bookings. Or you can click a button and you can view at the project level. So depending on what you're doing, what's your focus? Are you focusing on making sure that your resources are utilized? So maybe I want to look at my resources. Or do I want to focus on making sure my project is staffed? I can view by project. Another thing that this does for you is it gives you the ability to do that what-if analysis. So something that people didn't really like about the bookings module for a long time was sometimes you just want to play. You kind of want to sandbox to try out different resources, see how schedules overlap, make sure you've got good coverage, but you don't really want to commit to anything. Maybe you have one of those notifications set up that we talked about. So you don't want to like accidentally trigger off, 10 emails to a single resource because you keep changing their booking. So this allows you to make all the changes you want in the booking planner, but nothing is set in stone until you click the Save button. So once you have everything looking the way you want, you hit Save, and all of those changes you made are locked in. And any notifications or alerts will be triggered accordingly. One con that we've gotten from feedback from our customers is that there's too much data in one space, or like on one page. I guess for lack of a better expression, it seems kind of overwhelming sometimes to people. There's a lot of colors and there's a lot of bands, and it can be kind of busy if you don't know exactly what you're looking at. But some of that can be mitigated by using filters on the page to restrict which resources you're viewing, which projects you're viewing, change your time frame, change the increment of time. Maybe daily is a little overwhelming, so I want to look at my bookings on a monthly basis, etc. Okay, Let's talk about resource demand request. So this is sort of the new kid on the block when it comes to bookings in OpenAir. So what is the resource demand request process? Well, it's a behemoth. It's a big feature. What do I mean by that? It comes with a lot of learning and administration involved. So we have found that over time we are finding more and more organizations can get some usage out of the resource demand request. You really have to have the right business and staffing model in place to get the most out of this feature. So where does it stand up? It's really great for identifying and booking large numbers of resources at one time, specifically resources who share a similar skill set. So if I have a project and I have a development task, and I need to put 7 to 12 developers on that one task, and all of those need to be JavaScript, whatever the skill set is, I can do a search. I can find all of my available resources that have that skill set. I can pick the ones I want. It has a matching system based on a percentile match of the skill set profile that you've entered. And you can push that request out, gets approved, and then boom, you've booked all of those people, right? So it can work in the right situation. Now, I would say that while some of these approaches sort of fit nicely within a centralized or decentralized model, this is absolutely something where you need to have a centralized process. Why do I say that? Because you need someone who is going to first of all, learn how to use the tool. It's a little bit overhead. Every customer I've demoed this tool for has, even if they ended up using it, there's been a steep learning curve in how everything fits together. That said, if you have a large project that needs to be booked, you need to get a lot of resources on that project, it's absolutely great if you have the centralized model and the personnel dedicated to learn the tool, understand the resource pool, and manage that number of bookings. It does require close management of skill profiles. In fact, it only works if you have your skill profiles built out. Now, skill profiles might be something as simple as, is this a functional resource or a developer or a project manager? But in my experience, most resources have more granular levels of skills that need to be considered when you're deciding whether or not to put them on a project. So in addition to availability, whether or not they're available at that time, you need to know quite a bit about your resources, and you need to enter it and maintain it in the system. And skill profiles are something that do require a lot of administration. Another con, there's a lot of steps to this process. During the process, you don't get resource schedule visibility while you're searching, requesting, etc., to get these resources booked onto a project. It's time consuming, and like I said, most of the clients that I have shown this to tend to come away feeling kind of confused, or at the very least feel like it's overkill for their needs. However, for the clients that use it, it's a lifesaver for that rare business where, yeah, I do need to put 75 testers on one project in one city for the same week. It's great. Okay, let's pivot away from the resources module now, and let's talk about the project module. So if you're more comfortable working in the project module and you have a decentralized model of resource management, this might work better than the resources module for you. So you can look at your project plan and assign your resources accordingly, and then view those resource assignments. Requires absolutely no approval workflow or request. You assign someone to a task, they're assigned. It's pretty simple. The flip side of that, just like manually entering a booking, that resource is reserved right then. If you have a resource whose filter set says they can only enter time against a project they're assigned to, just assign them, and boom, they're able to enter their time. It's immediate gratification. And there is an assignment chart that's available. It's a feature that you can enable, so you can see all of your assignments in a chart form on a project. Now, of course, like anything, there's some pros and cons to this approach. So within the project plan, if you're using your project plan to manage your resource schedule, you can change start and end dates. You can adjust hours on the go. You can use the Gantt chart feature in the tasks tab in a project to view all of your resources across the different tasks on the project. You can see dependencies. In fact, with the April release, there are some new enhancements to the Gantt chart that make it a lot more useful. Now, what you really give up when you use assignments versus bookings is granularity. And really, you give up almost all of the granularity that's possible when using a booking. Why do we say that? Well, assignments work best for tracking what and who, right? Which resource am I looking at? What are they working on? But it doesn't tell you when they're working on it. It doesn't always tell you how much of their time in any given week they're going to spend working on that. You might have resources who are assigned to, multiple tasks over the same time period, with the understanding that, well, a couple of days are going to be spent here, a couple of days are going to be spent there, but you don't really know what they're working on at any given moment just by looking at the task assignment. Now, to that end, we're getting closer to the end of our time, so let's talk about these other features. Booking to a task. Out of the box, when you're using the bookings in OpenAir, you tend to book to a project, right? So now you do have the ability to book to a task. Why would you want to book to a task? Well, it definitely adds granularity. Every time you're creating a booking, you not only need to know who, what, and when, but you also need to know which task on that project the user is going to be working on. It helps with the granularity of tracking and forecasting, right? So oftentimes on a project, we might have a billing rule that is set up specifically to a particular job code, right? And let's say that when we have users on a specific job code, we're going to book and include a job code on our bookings. Well, suddenly we can tie specific rates to that task based on the booking. We can forecast rates. So we put generics out there and we book our generics to specific tasks. If we have task-specific billing or recognition, we can forecast that, right, using just the bookings. What are some downsides? The obvious downside, and probably the most often mentioned one, is just the overwhelming overhead. It may not seem like it, but when you have to add a task to a booking, it almost doubles the amount of energy and time you have to spend thinking about the booking. I mean, goodness gracious, if you have 3 tasks on a project, maybe it's not that big of a deal. But if you're some of those folks out there who have 10, 20, 100 or more tasks on each project, this is obviously going to probably be overwhelming for any poor soul who has to manage the bookings on that project. So that's maybe something to consider. Now, if you do have a situation where you're going to have a resource who's working on the same project during a time period, like during this week, they're going to be working on this project, but you need to have them working on different tasks during that week, sure, let's put 8 hours on this task, we'll put 32 hours on this other task, we'll have 2 bookings, but during that time period, they're fully booked to that project, but you can break out in reporting, et cetera, which task they're working on. And we mentioned this briefly when we were talking about the planner, but bulk updates. So you can bulk update and edit bookings from within the booking list view, the planner, or the advanced booking worksheet that I had mentioned previously. So this is really great. So for example, we've got a user on a project. Someone comes in, says, hey, we need to swap resources. So just take resource A and replace them with resource B. Well, use your filters. Isolate all of the bookings for that time period for resource A. Click a button. Select the new resource from a drop-down. Hit save. Suddenly you've updated 10, 20, 1,000 bookings at one time without having to click into each one, or without even having to go into the planner, without having to open up a workbook and click each cell. It's really powerful. You can grab a bunch of bookings. You can move everything out for a predetermined number of days. You can change, like we mentioned previously, you can bulk update the booking type. Maybe if you have a model like we talked about where you're using booking type to manage workflow around requested bookings versus confirmed, and maybe you're the approver who sees those requested bookings, you don't have to click into each one to change the task type. You can multi-select in that way. Okay, well, that's the end of our slides. So just a reminder that who we are, TopStep Consulting. We're a leading provider of business efficiency solutions for your PS business operations. Here's some of our credentials. Find us at www.topstepconsulting.com and go to our resource library. You can view any of our webinars that we've done in the past. You can view white papers and even some blog items there that might be useful, some free consulting. So at